Wait, so what's that?
Okay. Let's go back to here. Oh, it's working.
Oh, excellent.
Baruch Hashem. Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard and welcome back. Mrs. Abrams is the usual one. Okay, we'll find out. We are about to get ready for our new season. It's warming up. It's coming up to Rosh Hashanah. You can barely remember what we usually do. We start off first with what's going on in the Yiddish calendar. And from there we go on to what's going on in the Parshah. And from there we move on to one practical, relevant life message that we can take from this week's Parshah. As the Alter Rebbe taught us, the Leben mit the Zeit, we want to live with the times, which doesn't mean we read the times as in the newspaper. We read the real times, what's really going on, which is the Parshah of the week. And we look for meaningful, practical, relevant life messages that can help us in our personal life for real, in a way that can make us and empower us better poised, better ready to be able to make every moment special. So what's going on in the Yiddish calendar this week? What is going on in the Yiddish calendar this week? Anyone? Mrs. Abrams, help us out.
Me?
Yes. What's going on in your calendar? Should we ask?
Oh no, school, but now I've got you back on Monday evenings. I'm staying up after 8:30.
Hey.
Very important. It's a lot to do with the Rebels this week, isn't it? And
oh yes, today.
And also we're going from the 18th day to Rosh Hashanah, which is 12 days, but it's like the Rebbe said, it's like 12 months of avoda because you have to. Yes.
We're on fire today. Amazing. So unpacking some of what Mrs. Abrams just shared with us, starting off with the double birthday today. Yeah. Double birthday today was the Baal Shem Tov's birthday. Baal Shem Tov, obviously his birthday was a special day because that's when Hashem invested his neshama into our world. And he was born to an elderly couple, Leza and his wife, who had the child as a tremendous nace, a bracha in their older age. And Yisrael grew up. By the time he was a young boy, he was already a Catholic. He lost both his mother and his father. But as we'll see today, we're going to talk a little bit about it. He feared no one. He was afraid of nothing besides for Hashem. And little Yisrael, the Baal Shem Tov, grew up, and he became known as a Baal Shem. A Baal Shem was a title that is given to the people who worked practical Kabbalah and used the information that they had acquired in their personal education and learning of Yiddishkeit, of Torah, of the mystical, of the secret of Torah, to help people and to bring more brachas and more goodness into the people's lives around them. And they were known as the Baal Shems, and the Yisrael Baal Shem Tov was one of those people, including his teacher, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Lior Baal Shem, Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. But the Baal Shem Tov was far more famous than all the other Baal Shems in his time because he didn't just help other people in his surrounding. Like many other ones, he traveled, but he created a wave of change, such positive change that at the beginning it was hard to imagine that it was really good. So many things had gone wrong, or not wrong, but had become really challenging for Yiddish people. It was hard to imagine that something good was actually happening. And for a lot of the Talmidei Chachamim, a lot of Rabbanim had a hard time imagining that this was actually something good. And it took a long time, probably the best part of 100 years, for the dust to settle. And for people to be able to look back and say to themselves, actually, all the Hasidic teachings haven't made matters worse, have only brought more goodness. To this day, where the average, you can almost say there's no place in the world that hasn't been positively affected by the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, either directly or indirectly. Every single part of Yiddishkeit has been upgraded by the gift the Baal Shem Tov brought to us. But that didn't happen too much later, because the Baal Shem Tov turned 26 before he met his spiritual teacher, Achia Shaloni, and he was 36 years old when he was told by his teacher that we've been learning for 10 years, training's up, it's now time for action. Like a parachutist, the paratroopers who at a certain point got to jump out of the plane. All this training and learning, this is all go live. You've got to go and share the word. You've got to lead up and step into a role that would be earth-changing, and you're going to be the center figure. And Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem said, look, I'm happy to support. I'm happy to make it throw my all into it. Just don't make me the forefront. I don't want to be the leader. And the message he got back was you will not meet your spiritual teacher again until you step up to the plate and start doing what your neshama was born to do. His father, Olav Hashanah, Rabbi Eliezer, came to the Baal Shem Tov, came to Rechiah Shiloni, and the Baal Shem Tov actually experienced this entire story, some fascinating fun facts of how he insisted on steering clear. But on his 36th birthday, he was almost compelled, if you like Moshe Rabbeinu in his day, by the burning bush. He turned down Hashem's request, and eventually had no other option, had to go. Baal Shem Tov started leading, and it wasn't always easy. Baal Shem Tov literally change the tide. A lot of the big deals, a lot of the big differences was the Baal Shem Tov teaching that everybody could serve Hashem whatever they had. Where for us this sounds normal, but back in the day, it was considered the only way to serve Hashem is through learning Torah. And all the mitzvahs were just tools to make sure we don't do the wrong thing. But the only real way to become a servant of Hashem is somebody who can sit and study Torah deeply, diligently, and somebody who didn't have that time, wasn't privileged to be able to get the education, or maybe didn't have the mental capacity. It was considered not just second class, a nochschlepper. It was disrespectful for someone who wasn't a Talmud Chacham to show up in the Rabbanim shul. Instead, you had shuls that were for the cobblers, or shuls for the laborers. And they would try and figure out what needs to be done, but they wouldn't dare go to daven in the Rabbanim shul, because that would be disrespectful to the Torah that the Rabbanim had learned. And you can imagine the divide that was growing amongst the classes within Yiddishkeit, and this is a religious divide, a divide that was considered sacred to both sides of the coin and adhered to. I mean, that was in addition to all the struggles of the financial, the social, the security, and just social amongst the people that they lived. In addition to that, to then also have a religious divide, it was very taxing on the average Yiddish person who was desperately trying to become close to Hashem, which didn't have the opportunity until the Baal Shem Tov came. And would spend his time talking to, encouraging, building up what he considered the treasured Yid, the Yerushalayim, those who were pious but didn't have either the mental capacity, the privileged childhood, or the education to be able to sit and study Torah. And he encouraged people to serve Hashem with what they could, whether it's a fiery heart, a lively davening, saying words of Torah, serving Hashem through keeping every mitzvah that they can keep to the best of their ability. And this was a major tide changer, but to a lot of Rabbanim, it came across as if it was an affront to the high reverence that people had for Torah and only Torah. But it took time, and people started to appreciate it slowly, and more people got on board. At a certain point in the Baal Shem Tov's life, on his birthday, he made a tremendous farbrengen, if you like, but shiurim and divrei Torah, a gathering amongst all these tremendous Kabbalists and Nistarim and the Chevrei Kedisha, and he shared with them that a tremendously new innovation had come upon the world, and that was a newborn child had just been born with a neshama chadasha. And the Baal Shem Tov explained that most neshamas have been around the block, meaning they've been down in this world once, twice, or maybe more times to try and complete their mission. And as much as the mission has been completed, that stays in Shemayim, and then the neshama gets a second try to come back down into this world and continue completing its mission. And neshama chadasha is extremely rare. Hashem creates a new mission. This mission was for this new neshama that had been born on that same exact day, which was today, Chai Elul, the 18th day of Elul. He shares birthdays with the Baal Shem Tov, and 3 years later, this newborn child, little Shnei Zalman, came to have his upsharing with permission from the Baal Shem Tov on strong orders that the child not be told who the great Rav was that was going to cut his hair, and his father was not to bring him. His mother and his aunt brought him, and they traveled all the way to Mezibush, and that's where the Baal Shem Tov cut his hair, but he would never meet him face to face again. And he was never told about him until he himself, Shnei Zalman, little young Alter Rebbe to be, would eventually discover Chassidus in his own journeys. and he would become a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov's Talmud. And he would call the Baal Shem Tov his grandfather, his spiritual grandfather, because when he was a little boy, 3 years old, he'd asked his mother, who was that who cut my hair? And the mother was under strict orders not to say, and she said, oh, that was a Zayda. And that became the Alter Rebbe's Zaydi. His Zaydi was the Baal Shem Tov, and spiritually that was the case as well, because he was the student of the student. So if his teacher is his father, his teacher's teacher would be his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. And they shared birthdays, and the Alter Rebbe was born on that same day, would go on to teach and elaborate that which the Baal Shem Tov had founded in a very systemized, intelligent, and understandable way. And the Baal Shem Tov's movement was known as Hasidism, or Hasidus, and there were many strands of different Hasidic masters who continued on that light, and they were specifically supposed to, each one further in their own way. The Alter Rebbe took it to another level by systemizing, if you like, but putting it in a way that we can understand, and he called it the Chabad strand of Chassidus, Chabad being Chachma bin Das, which are the levels of intelligence, of understanding that we can comprehend, we can grasp, we can know about Hashem, what our place with Hashem is, and what our mission in life is. So if we had to sum up the Baal Shem Tov's gift to Yiddishkeit, was that every single person can have a personal relationship with Hashem. Everyone. The Alter Rebbe then takes it to the next level and says, not only can everyone have a personal relationship with Hashem, let's learn how to have that relationship. So the Baal Shem Tov tells us that we can, and the Alter Rebbe shows us how to do what we can. And this is the steps that the Alter Rebbe put out. And the gift was so enormous. Starting off with the book of Tanya and the Mamarim that the Alter Rebbe shared, until every single one of the Rabbeim would base the Chassidus that they taught on the fundamentals that the Alter Rebbe laid out throughout the years that he led Chassidism until he went over to his son, the Mittler Rebbe. But the birthday of anybody is a tremendous celebration. The birthday is the time where Hashem doesn't just bring the neshama into the world. The neshama was around far before birth. The neshama remains way after a person passes on. But on a birthday, Hashem allocates a body to that soul and gives the soul, that neshama, an opportunity to make a difference in this world, where it really matters, where it really counts. And that's what a birthday is. We celebrate the opportunity that was created by associating a neshama with a particular body, and that's what creates the opportunity. And the anniversary of the opportunity created is what we call a birthday. So everything about the Baal Shem Tov and everything about the Alter Rebbe, Mazalayim Goivar, is a strong extra boost of energy in that particular gift that they brought to the world. And that's why today, Chayel, is a day where we can take additional energy that's available for us as those who reap the benefits for everything that these two great heroes gifted our world with, and equally to take the energy that they invested and carry on their mission, what they live for, their birth. That's what birth is, a mission. It happens to be that the birth of humanity is also just around the corner, and that was the second thing Mrs. Abrams mentioned, and that is that starting from today, we have a 12-day countdown, or count up, to the Jewish New Year. Good evening.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it still Friday night? On Friday?
Ariane, I'm going to have to let you down. Do you know what? Let me give you a call in about 45 minutes. Is that okay?
Tomorrow or whatever. It's
yes.
Just that we've seen you. I just wanted to ask.
That's very kind of you. I'm going to give you a call. I'll give you a shout either later tonight or tomorrow.
Tomorrow, when you've got more time.
No worries at all. Thanks for stopping by.
Oh.
Sein gesund.
You too.
Bye now.
Bye.
So the 12-day count up from where we are now to Rosh Hashanah is day for a month. Avodah of Chodesh Tishrei corresponds to the 18th of Elul, and the service that we went through this past Chodesh Mar Cheshvan will be tonight and tomorrow, Yotes Elul, and so on and so forth. Kislev will be the day after, Teves, Shvat, Adar, until we get to the final day of the year, corresponds to the final month of the year, Elul, and then we're ready for restart, the birth of humanity, the birth of Adam Rishon. Well, the truth is, Adam wasn't really born, he was made, but he was created as a grown person, as was Chava. But the idea of birth being the start and the power, the opportunity for a mission, that's the same. And that's what makes Rosh Hashanah so special. So as we take stock and we think about what went well, what happened this past year that was good, let's try and strengthen those. Let's compliment ourselves, let's celebrate our wins, and then try and make sure that we don't slow down in those areas, because sometimes we're doing well, but it needs extra boost to keep it up. And that's already a win. Additionally and equally, if there's certain things that need correction that we can do differently, now's a great time to think about what we can correct. Now, for most of us, it's not easy to remember what happened 12 months ago. It's hard to remember what we had for breakfast this morning, let alone what we had for breakfast 12 months ago, or 11 months ago, 10 months ago, or what else we did during the day. But the general gist, where were the things that we did very well, that we should be strengthening, and where are the things that might deserve an upgrade or a change? This is a day for a month stretch, starting from today, Yud Chai Elul, for the 12 months. And then, if that's not enough going on this week, we also have a very special Shabbos coming up, which is known as Shabbos Slichos. It could be called Shabbos Mevarchim. We'll start off with Shabbos Slichos. For the last few days before the end of the year, even the Ashkenazic Jews get up early and say Slichos with a minimum of 4 days. And we always start off with a Matzah Shabbos. As Shabbos ends, we roar into overdrive and high-speed booster packs, where we turn to Hashem and we ask for slichos, we ask Hashem for forgiveness. And that starts with this Motzei Shabbos, and the entire Shabbos leading up to this Motzei Shabbos is a supercharged Shabbos. The whole Shabbos is known as Shabbos Slichos. At the same time, this year, Shabbos Slichos turns out to be the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah will be on a Shabbos, and therefore the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah would have been the Shabbos before the new month. It would have been Shabbos Mevarchim, but on this month we don't bless the new month. Instead, we rely on Hashem to bring the brachas for this upcoming month, Rosh Hashanah, and for all the 11 months that will follow, and we bless from Rosh Hashanah. Hashem gives the brachas to see. However, we still have the minhag to say Tehillim, which is strongly encouraged. As the Friedrich Rebbe writes, it is beneficial for one's own life, for their children, and their children's children. Tehillim and Shabbos Mevarchim, so special. So even though it's not literally Shabbos Mevarchim, because it's not the Shabbos where we bench, but it's still Shabbos Mevarchim, because it's the Shabbos that Hashem benches in the month. It's Shabbos Slichos, it's Chai Elul, and therefore we're also starting the last 12 days of the year. It's a very special stretch in Yiddishkeit. We are also going to now move on to what goes on in this week's Parshah, and it's exciting to say it's not Shabbos Chazak, but it's a double Parshah. Nitzavim and Vayelech. Usually a double Parshah, you start thinking, it's going to be a long Parshah read, but rest assured that this double Parshah is still shorter than your average Parshah on a single Parshah, because you have the shortest and second shortest Parshas together, which make a total of just 70 Pesukim combined. It's 40 plus 30. But what do we have in Parshas Nitzavim and Parshas Vayelech? So let's just read through here. We have, Nitzavim starts off with, following on with last week's Parshah, in which we had the Toichachim, the rebuke, the harsh consequences for bad choices. And this week's Parshah, Moshe Rabbeinu starts off telling us that although we read such harsh readings last week, we are still steadfast. We are standing united and strong together on all levels, from all circles amongst Yiddish people, Rashechem, Sheftechem, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells us that the time will come that there will be exiles. And unfortunately, we know this all too well. But even as we are sent away from our homeland, Even in exile, Hashem is always with us, doesn't forsake us. Hashem will bring us back. And not only bring us back from those who are nearby, from the furthest afield, everybody will come back. We also learn about the importance of the mitzvahs that Hashem has commanded us, and that Moshe Rabbeinu calls upon the witnesses, heaven and the earth. But that's next week's Parshah. But he tells us that there's this week's Parshah that Moshe Rabbeinu tells us that the mitzvahs that Hashem gives to us are made to work, are made for us, are made to be doable. They're not in heaven, they're not across the sea. They are very nearby, they are very doable. And the Alter Rebbe in Tanya says, his entire book sets out to tell us how it is so doable. It's very doable. We are told also about our free choice. We're told that we have the ability to choose between good and bad, life and the opposite of life. And Hashem asks us to choose life. To choose to have a good life. The end of the Parshas Vayelech. We also have a few interesting Parshas. Parshas Vayelech starts off with Moshe Rabbeinu telling us that he no longer can lead us. He's 120 years old, and it's not because he's sick, it's not because he's weak, it's because Hashem has told him it's time to pass on the baton. And who is he giving it over to? To Yeshua. And he sits down and he writes the entire Torah, puts in the sefer, in the Aron, to be able to keep it safe. We learn this mitzvah that every person, and especially the king, has to have a sefer Torah, has to write a Torah. We also learn the mitzvah of hakel, of gathering, where Moshe Rabbeinu tells the people that when they get into Eretz Yisrael, there'll be Shemitah every 7th year, a sabbatical year. And following that, as the Shemitah year finishes, people going back to work, that Sukkot will become the time where we will reconvene and gather together, men, women, children, infants and babies, and everybody together, to become to a place where we will allow ourselves to re-inspire ourselves, led by the king, who would read from the Torah in the Beis HaMikdash in a way that we should hear and inspire each other, and become inspired from the Torah to continue doing the avodah, the service that Hashem has given to us. The end of the parsha we have here is also a parsha that ends up by saying that although there'll be times where Yiddish people will go off the beaten track, Hashem promises lo yamush picha, that the Torah will never cease from amongst the people. And even as we see, and we can't imagine how we're ever going to get past this really challenging stretch of Jewish history, how can we ever believe that Yiddishkeit will stay strong? We have the promise, and the same Torah that tells us that we have to keep the Torah also tells us don't worry. It shall not be forgotten from the mouths of their descendants. And if you think about it, the miracle that Jewish people still exist as a distinct identity, even though we've been crushed by so many superpowers. We've had so many times where people have tried to, in good ways and in nasty ways, try and force us away from Torah. The greatest miracles that we know of is the fact that we are still here. Not just that we're still alive, because that's a great miracle in itself, but that we are alive today and still identify as Yidden, as Jewish people. That doesn't happen by itself. That doesn't happen with nations that are crushed and are persecuted. And that also doesn't happen naturally with people who are enlightened or led astray. But here we have a promise that till this very day has kept going strong, and that's the promise. That keeps us going, and we know for sure, Hashem will bring us back. So we're holding on strong, and the Parsha starts off with Atem Nitzavim Hayom. You are standing today steadfast, and we are all standing in unity. And it ends off the Parshas Vayelech with the promise that you will continue to do so, and you will continue to hold on to the Torah all the way throughout the future history as well. Amazing. So this is a little bit of what's going on in Taste of the Parsha. We're going to actually choose one part of the Parsha to focus on. And it's very appropriate that we're going to choose this part, obviously because it's part of the Parsha, and because there's a lot to say about it. It's one of the final mitzvahs in the entire book. And actually, it's appropriate because this is one of the final weeks of an entire year of Hakel. And in the Rebbe's lingo, things don't peter out. The more hakel we have, when we get fed up with it, we're building up more and more. So in the Rebbe's perspective, we are at the peak of hakel. The hakel year is just climaxing. It's so great how much hakel we've been hackling. Is that a word? It's become a word now. We've been hackling for a year, not heckling, hackling for a year already. And we're at the top of the Gum. Well, let's talk about hakel because it's this week's Parshah, where this mitzvah is actually recorded. And the whole, since last Sukkot, that we've been hackling, it's all based on this week's Parshah. So let's do a little bit about hakel. Now, it's not only going to be entirely just hakel, but hakel has a lot to be said and a lot to teach us about a very broad area in Yiddishkeit, and the focus is going to be yira, fear, awe. The Torah tells us in about the pasuk of Hakel that we gather together to be inspired, liyares Hashem, to fear heaven, to have yira shamayim. And we're going to talk about yira shamayim, and we're going to talk about that fear of heaven is considered a fundamental in Yiddishkeit. So much so, we're going to start off with this quote from the Gemara, where the Gemara says that when we read the Siddur and we start davening, some of the areas of the Siddur we know off by heart. We know the order from when we first started davening. And we know that the Shema is really important in davening. It's really important in the morning. It's really important at night. The Shema is a fundamental mitzvah. Excuse me. But the Shema actually is made up of three parshas, three separate portions, Shema, V'Haya, and Vayemer. And those three parshas aren't from the same place in the Torah. Each one of them is from a different sefer. Shema and V'Haya in the Sefer Devarim. Vayemer is way back when in Vayikra. And the Gemara is discussing, because let's accept these three are very important and we're going to say them every day. But which order shall we say them in? Should we start off with Shema and then V'Haya and then Vayemer? Maybe a different order. Should we maybe say them in the order that they're recorded in the Torah? In which case we would start off with Vayemer. Says Rabbi Shua in this Gemara in Brachas, Rabbi Shua says, why is it that the Siddur is organized in such a way where we say first the Shema, then V'Haya, and then Vayemer? And the answer is because the content of Shema is appropriate and is necessary before we're ready to say V'Haya. If we haven't said Shema yet, we're not yet ready to say V'Haya, because the thrust of the Parashah of Shema mainly focuses on accepting Hashem as King. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And until we haven't said that verse, that Hashem is the King, we're not yet ready to say the portion of V'Haya, which talks about the mitzvahs that we should do or shouldn't do. You should listen to Hashem. If you follow the orders, then good things will come. If you don't follow the orders, then all sorts of whatever things will happen. And then you remember it'll come back to being good things, and you make sure you do the following mitzvahs. There's an assumption that there are mitzvahs that have to be followed. Says the Gemara, unless you know, unless you've accepted Hashem as King, then you don't have any mitzvahs. Why not? Because you can't have a commandment to follow the King unless there's a King. If I don't believe that there is a Hashem, or I don't have accepted Hashem, then the mitzvahs haven't begun. In the words of the Gemara of Shuvin Garcha, the reason is that one first accepts upon themselves the authority of the kingdom of heaven, and only then, once you've accepted the authority, can we now accept what this authority has commanded upon us. And only then accept upon themselves the authority of the mitzvahs which appear in the paragraph of V'Haya Im Shema. So we have to first accept the yoke of heaven, the responsibility, the acceptance of Shema, of Hashem, and only then acceptance, the yoke of mitzvahs. That sort of connotation where a person is submitting, submissiveness to authority like Hashem, and then submitting further to the mitzvahs, is by all accounts a basic fundamental of Yiddishkeit. And this is what we want to ask ourselves. Between fear of Hashem and love of Hashem, which one is more inspiring? Which one is more motivating? Is fear a better motivator, or is warmth and love a better motivator? Help me out.
Both.
Both are good motivators?
Both motivate you in different ways.
Okay.
At times you are motivated by fear to do something, even though you're fearful of doing it. You know you have to do it. To be motivated by love can be more of an emotional thing, but it's still as important. I can't differentiate between the two.
Okay, I like what we're saying. They're both very important. They're both very powerful. Is it fair to argue that a fear motivator, let's just say, imagine somebody sees a wild animal heading their way and fear sets in, and thank goodness they're not frozen in place, they're going to get up and do things that they maybe were too lazy to do until this point, but right now they're not lazy because the fear motivates them to do it. But once that fearsome factor fades away, it's very likely that they'll go back to being lazy. Because however motivating that fear factor was, it was only as motivating as superimposing fear upon them.
But you can't live your whole life in fear.
Oh,
you
exactly.
have to have love to go with it. That's why the two cannot be separated as such. You can be fearful, but after that, you can also be loving. And maybe the fear will make you realize that you could actually now be more loving than you were towards something, because you're so thankful that fear has now gone.
Wow. Okay. And one could argue then that the love motivator is deeper and longer lasting, because the love factor, you're not trying to get away from. You're not trying to shirk off. You're not waiting and praying for this love factor to stop compared to the fear factor.
Yeah, but love can also be hard work. Love isn't just a word. Love, Rabbi Cohen, why can't you be like my husband and just nod your head and stay? But instead of you're arguing with me.
I'm actually agreeing with you. I'm gonna take it one step further though.
Go on.
I'm gonna say that what you've just said, if we borrow the 18th of Elul, birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, it would seem the Baal Shem Tov's major innovation, or at least one of his major innovations, was the ability to serve Hashem with love. That's why the Hasidim were called the Freiliche, the happy ones. They would walk around smiling. Take it a step further. They recognized that it wasn't good enough just to be scared of Hashem is going to come and get me if I do the wrong thing. You've got to have a feeling towards Hashem, develop feelings for Hashem, closeness to Hashem, have a relationship.
Yeah, but they were fearful when they went into the land of Israel, because they didn't know if they could do all the things that they had been taught and all the things they were carrying out. And for them to go into a land without Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Yahushua was working through Moshe, was a fearful time. But it was their love of their learning and the Torah that made them do that. So they had both. Didn't they have both then? They had fear and they had the love of the learning that they knew would carry them through, because they had been promised by Hashem. That's what would happen.
Okay, I grant it. However, I've got to argue on this point. But Yeshua was told, have no fear. Not only that, he was told, make sure you have no fear. Fear of, as in fear of scary opportunities, scary circumstances, even wars, even fighting enemies. Make sure you do not have fear. Be courageous and don't have fear. The only fear you should have is fear of
failure. And he wasn't going to fail.
Even that not. He wasn't entitled, he wasn't allowed to have fear of failure. The only thing he was allowed to have fear of is Hashem.
Okay.
Now, that does tie into the Baal Shem Tov in a different way, because the Baal Shem Tov, as a young boy, as we said, remember we started off by saying, he left home. No, he didn't have much of a home. His parents had passed away. They were poor paupers. They lived in the gutters almost. And he was taken into foster home. But he would often wander out into the fields, even staying out in the forest overnight And they were very worried for him. But he wasn't worried. He was afraid of nothing aside from Hashem. I've got to throw in this joke. I don't know how rabbinic it is, but there's one line that an atheist and a rabbi can absolutely agree on. And that is that if you fear God, you have nothing to fear. It's not really for the Rav to say this, but it's true. The atheist doesn't fear him, whatever. Okay. If you believe in, if you fear Hashem, you have nothing else to fear of. You're nothing to fear of. Say right. But this idea, to fear Hashem is a thing. It's actually a mitzvah. Yiras Hashem is a mitzvah. We wear a yarmulke because it's called Yorei Malka. It reminds us to have awe and fear of Hashem. And fear of Hashem, Ahava and Yira, love and fear of Hashem, are both big deals, and they're both important. We need both. But we're asking, is Yira, fear of Hashem, really the best motivator? I mean, in today's day and age, we know that if we shout at our children to do the right thing, even if they do it, it's not going to last as long as being helping them develop an appreciation for why they should do it. So there must be an element of awe, of fear in education, discipline. But at the same time, the real motivator isn't the discipline, isn't the harsh words, but it's in the discipline of education, of empowerment, when a person develops an appreciation for why this thing is good or the other thing is not good.
But what about if we say, in this month, there can be fear because there is so much riding on this by the time we get to Rosh Hashanah, and the love is hearing the shofar and celebrating Rosh Hashanah to know how lucky we have been to celebrate. We could put fear and love in that context as well.
That is exactly where we're going. Oh. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to focus on Hakel, especially because Hakel doesn't mention love. It does mention Yira, fear. The king gathered the people. They all stood there to listen and to experience in order to develop fear of Hashem. And that needs explaining, especially if we're going to follow the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, of the Baal Shem Tov, and we're going to read this here, that actually the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, which is on the screen right now, is telling us exactly this, what you just said, that we need both. And they are both, in that context, very important. One must constantly bear in mind the first step of religious service and what lies at its very core. Now, conventionally, fear is the primary driver behind abstaining from prohibited behaviors. So prohibitions, saying no, breaks, being able to hold and have boundaries is driven by fear. Whereas love is the primary driver motivating positive behavior. Doing good things, being productively good, is driven by behaviors that are active, are driven by a motivating factor, and that's love. However, says the Alter Rebbe, love alone is really not enough to drive good behavior. Love is hard work, someone said before, but love is also suffocating. Love is overbearing if there's no boundaries. Rather, at the very least, it's critical to draw upon the natural fear every Jew has deep in their heart not to rebel against Hashem. Work must be done to bring this natural fear into full expression in the heart or mind. A Jew must accept upon themselves God's authority and sovereignty so that they serve Him in every way, and only after we've called into full expression a natural fear of Hashem, can we then also enjoy and develop the love for Hashem, which will be very motivating. But at the core, at the beginning, we must have the idea of Yiras Hashem first. And we want to talk a little about this Yiras Hashem, how it's a motivator and how it makes sense to us, especially if people are talking about being able to be close to Hashem. So that's the general gist. But here's the quote from our Parshah that talks about Hakel. Let's read it in the English. And then Moshe commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, at an appointed time during the festival of Sukkot, right after the end of the year of release, or end of Shemitah, where Shemitah finishes the end of Elul, that coming Sukkot, when all of Israel comes to appear before Hashem in the place he will choose, Beis HaMikdash, you shall read this Torah before all Israel in their ears. By the way, the Beis HaMikdash, the geographical location of the Beis HaMikdash had not yet been disclosed. And that's why the Torah says, in the place he will choose, because Yerushalayim hadn't been chosen at the time Moshe was talking. And there in Yerushalayim, at the Beis HaMikdash, all the Jews will come together, and you shall read this Torah before all of Israel in their ears. Assemble the people, the men, the women, and the children, and your stranger in your cities, in order that they hear, and in order that they learn, and fear Hashem. They've got to hear, learn, and fear Hashem. And they will observe to do all the words of this Torah through fear. And the children who did not know will hear and learn to fear Hashem all the days that you live on the land that you are crossing Jordan to possess. So as you go into Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be important to reenact a Matan Torah. For those who hadn't heard it before, those who were born much later, so that they may also experience an equivalent to the revelation of Har Sinai and be able to learn, hear, learn, and fear Hashem. So you can imagine it was an enormous, massive assembly, and everybody was there. But what was the goal of that ceremony? To instill fear of Hashem. And we're asking ourselves, what is this fear that we're trying to instill? What's the positivity that we're trying to put through here? And we're calling it fear. And Chassidus is a massive idea to share when it comes to Yira. And that idea is best described in this Hakel mitzvah. Let's do a few texts here. Here's a quote from the Alter Rebbe, just building up. He say this is used as a question because in other places in Chassidus it seems to be saying that if a person feels small, a person says, "Who am I? And what can I do? What can I accomplish?" The net result will be that they'll become less productive. Crushing somebody, a student, a follower, doesn't help them become more productive. And this is something that we're asking, why are we suggesting that fear is so important if it leaves the person feeling inferior, less, as if they should steer clear. That's not going to make us more active, more productive. So here we have the question. The answer is going to be, let's just flick through some slides here. One second, here we go. The sea change that occurred at Sinai is not so much the Jews learned Torah or heard the mitzvahs from Hashem. After all, those things happened before Sinai, with the patriarchs as well. Rather, the major change was that then the Jews were able to actually see it, as stated in many verses, as well known, seeing something is incomparable to hearing it. Hearing is from a distance, which is why abstract things can only be heard through cognitive, through cognitive processes, but not seen. Visuals, by definition, are up close, which is why only tangible items can be seen, and why seeing something makes it so real. This is what happened at Sinai when the nation saw the thunder. As our sages say, they saw what is usually what we heard. In other words, the notion of I am your Eibishter, Anoich Hashem Elokecha, became as real and as true as something that can be physically seen. So we're learning here that the Hakel experience was supposed to be as real and as effective as the original Har Sinai. And what was so special about Har Sinai wasn't just that we learned the laws, because the laws were around beforehand. What we experienced at Har Sinai was the making it real, like a visual. We saw the words. It was so real to us. We experienced it so personally, there was no question in our mind anymore. It was almost tangible to us in our regular way of thinking. And this is exactly what Hakel looked to do. How would the people from old time, after the events of Sinai, be able to experience the feeling of seeing Hashem? Simply memorizing as the events of Sinai would not be enough. For memories from the past, when the person stands at a distance, there must be a special event, which is what Hakel was. Every Jew, man, woman, and child, gathered together as they did at Sinai and envisioned themselves as if they were now directly hearing the word of Hashem. How so? Through the king's delivery. The king became the representative, if you like, and represented the revelation of the Eibishter in his time. Just like Har Sinai, he was now inspiring the people by evoking Yiras Hashem in an experiential way. In a way that, imagine, if you've ever been to a massive stadium with thousands and thousands of people, he's talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of people. It's not just that you were at the game. It's not just that you were there at the show. There's something about the experience that is so it's so changing. That's what the king created. But the question we're asking is, how does inspiration and dread end up in the same sentence? Evoking dread and retreat. How's that inspiring? It seems to be maybe both positive in some way, both important, but how is that inspiring? How's that going to be motivating? How's that going to encourage people to do more, to be more active and more positive? And this is where Chassidus comes in and tells us, yes, absolutely. We must have Yiras Hashem, absolute awe and fear of Shemayim, of Hashem, of the Rebbeinu Shalom. But don't stop there, because that's just half of the coin. But this Yira, with the other half of that same coin, of the other half of that same Yira, is actually so inspiring, so motivating. It manages to overcome distraction on every level. It allows us to be able to be focused, motivated, upbeat, driven people, just at the back of the dread and the retreat that is evoked by Matan Torah in its time and its replica of Hakel each year, and the message for us, how it alludes to us in our day-to-day life, especially now as we're on the peak and the climax of an entire year of Hakel. So let's do it. The Rambam points out also that the idea of Hakel was the king representing Hashem. If you think about it, the king is the perfect representative, ambassador, agent of Hashem, because the king actually himself also carries these two ideas in one sentence. On the one hand, the king evokes enormous fear. The king had absolute power. The Rambam writes in the Laws of King that nobody could do anything to challenge the king, and if they did, the king has the right to have people executed just because they were disrespectful to the king. That's how powerful the king was. Imagine how fearsome it is to be standing in front of a person who at the flick of a finger can order someone to be murdered. Well, not murdered, being put to death because it's halachically acceptable. Anyone who embarrasses or shames the king may be executed by the king. That's like absolute power. That's scary. That's fearsome in itself. Yet at the same time, that very same king, says the Rambam in the Laws of King, just as the Torah grants the king great honor and obligates everyone to revere him, so too the Torah commands the king to be lowly, empty at heart, as the verse states, my heart is a void within me, says King David, nor should he retreat the people with overbearing haughtiness, for the verse describes the king David should not lift up his heart over his brothers. Absolute humility. How does that work? How does absolute power and absolute humility end up in the same sentence, in the same individual? The king should be gracious, merciful to the small and the great, involving himself in their good and welfare. He should protect the honor of even the humblest of men. When he speaks to the people as a community, he should speak gently. As the Pasuk says, listen, my brothers, my people. Similarly, the Pasuk says, if today you will be a servant to these people, the king is considered a servant, working on behalf of the people. The king should always conduct himself with great humility. And how does that work? What makes a king act humble if he's got absolute power? And how does it even supposed to end up in the same person? And this is the same idea. The king, once we understand the fear, humility combination in the king, will then borrow that same idea to explain the Hakel inspiration and fear in the same sentence. And we'll also understand why fear is so important and so motivating. And we'll better understand how we in today's day and age can treasure the fear of Hashem and not feel crushed, but instead feel empowered by Yiras Shamayim. This is what Chassidus wants us to understand. Let's just see what it says on the screen. The king was sometimes feared and ridden, and yet he himself was supposed to complete some. Okay, let's do it. Here we go. I think this is the core of the answer. Oh, let's learn. This is basically a quote from the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek is explaining what Yiras Shamayim is. And the Rebbe uses this to help us understand how Yiras Shamayim in Hasidic understanding, the way the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbeim who followed help us understand. In his own personal life, the king was supposed to be entirely surrendered to Hashem. In other words, the level of surrender was supposed to be so deeply seared into his heart that it would be physically impossible to feel arrogant or to harbor any sense of ego. Rather, the king was supposed to be before Hashem as an inanimate stone lacking any movement. The stone doesn't have to deal with his own agendas or his heart leading him astray. The stone is inanimate. The king before Hashem has no other interests, no other values other than carrying out that which Hashem wants from him. This is a true Jewish king. The purpose of appointing a Jewish king is that through him, the Jews can surrender to Hashem. Every Jew must surrender to the king and follow his command. And as much as the king totally surrenders to Hashem and the Jews surrender to him, it emerges that through him, the Jew surrenders themselves before Hashem. This then is the king's job, to connect and submit the Jewish people to Hashem by way of his own surrender. Think of it. David Melech Yisrael, has no other interest, no other importance, no other values other than serving Hashem and leading the people to Hashem. Now he has absolute power, and everybody must submit to the king. But if the king is totally submitted to Hashem, well, where is he leading all those subjects to? Nowhere else but to Hashem. This is the setup of fear, the way the Torah describes it. At least the way Chassidus helps us understand how Torah explains it. Fear of heaven means that I am submitted to completely dedicated to Hashem. I am so surrendered entirely to Hashem, there's not an ounce of my body that is invested in anything other than serving Hashem. That's Yiras Shamayim to its nth degree. But what happens then is that I'm not small. I'm not crushed. I don't feel like overbearing and fear. I can't wait for this to be over. I recognize that I am in service of, an agent to, an ambassador on behalf of the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Fear of Hashem doesn't mean that if I misbehave, a ball of lightning is going to come and catch me, and you can't fight City Hall, or the Ribono Shel Olam's the master of the entire universe, he'll catch me wherever I'm going to hide. Fear of heaven means I recognize that everything about me is only belonging to Hashem, and it's the fear of doing anything that would let down or compromise the Ribono Shel Olam's creation called me. But anything that does further that purpose is what I'm looking for in that fear. And actually, the more submitted and surrendered I am to the Ribono Shel Olam and have fear of deviating, the more strong I feel. Which is why the halacha starts off in the very first halacha of the entire Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch Erechaim 1:1, chapter 1, halacha 1. Yiskaber ka'ari la'amod b'boker avodas yisbarach. Avodas barach. Person should wake up in the morning as strong as a lion to serve their creator. What motivates a person to roar out of bed like a lion and serve Hashem, the recognition that there's nothing else important, complete surrender to the Rebbeinu Shalom motivates a person not to be crushed and small, but recognizing that nothing else is to be feared. There's nothing else to fear. There's nothing else that carries any weight. Nothing else has any importance. Everything is about serving Hashem. What am I going to do? Hide? Why would I hide? Hiding is deviating from the plan. What will I do? I'll jump forward and do that which Hashem has created me for, because Yira doesn't mean that Hashem is going to catch me. Yira means that nothing else is worth fearing. Hashem is the only one that really exists and has any power anywhere. Now Yira takes on a whole new level. This is where the king of the lion, king of animals, we're supposed to wake up like iron. One sec. Let's get to the Sikha. Yeah, this is the quote, this is the summary of the Sikha we're about to learn is, which basically tells us, you should feel edified as God's ambassador, and thus unable to stoop so low as to give in to your baser urges. The reason why we have Yerushalayim is because Hashem created me, and Hashem is in control. That same fear makes me stand taller, not smaller, because that fear of deviating tells me that Hashem created me. Let's read it in the Sikha right here. Accepting Hashem's authority and fearing Him must be in a manner that evokes a platform. It is exclusively fear and submission. It can create feelings of deficiency or low self-worth. However, this would be counterproductive to anyone's religious duties. And so we evoke the platform to incorporate feelings of assertiveness, as the Pasuk says, Iskaber Kari, wake like a lion. This also empowers us to overpower our negative temptations. So what we have in this short paragraph helps us realize that we're not wrong in thinking that fear often makes a person feel crushed, low self-worth. However, fear can also, when it's done correctly, make a person feel more assertive, stand much taller. And that's why, when it came to the Hakel ceremony, the king of all people would stand not amongst the people, but step up onto a platform that was a big deal to build in the Beis Hamikdash, and it had to be on a platform, and that platform had a message. And that message was, we're going to learn how to fear Hashem in a way that raises us up. It makes us more assertive. We know that Hashem is relying on us. We are those lions, and we must roar into the next right thing to do out of fear of Hashem, out of submission to the Almighty, because when we have fear of Hashem, there's nothing else to fear. We're a little bit against the clock. This is a short story of how the Baal Shem Tov describes that when he was a young boy, he would go out into the forest and people were worried for him. And he said he was never afraid because his parents, his father told him, fear nothing than Hashem. And as we said earlier, the rabbi and the atheist agree that if you fear Hashem, you have nothing to fear. Literally, why do we have nothing to fear? If we're afraid of Hashem, then there is nothing else that can have any power. Because real submission to Hashem is to recognize that nobody can help me, nobody can hurt me. And when we can have that complete submission to Hashem, we are so empowered. We are so unafraid what the neighbors are going to say, what maybe somebody who's uneducated might say, and even somebody who claims to be educated. Because at the end of the day, it's only Hashem that really matters. And we are here to serve Him, and therefore we also matter, because we're serving Hashem. And those people who don't know yet also matter because they can and will serve Hashem. Accepting Hashem's authority and the sincere fear of heaven are the keys that open up the lock to every one of the heavenly chambers. Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim and Tamimus from Yiras Shamayim are the keys that open the lock to every one of the heavenly chambers. So, we're against the clock. The bracha is that Hashem should give us the courage to have Yiras Shamayim in a Hasidic, uplifting way, and to recognize the power and the faith that Hashem gives us and believes in us, and to do it with such simcha. with such joy. When we get ready for Rosh Hashanah, we should recognize that Hashem, Master of the universe, can't wait to meet us this Rosh Hashanah. And right now, the King is in the field, encouraging us. And as we celebrate Chayel, and we start the 12-day count up, and we get into this Shabbos of a double Parshah, Nitzavim, Atam Nitzavim Hayoim, plus Vayelech, where Hashem promises Liyamish B'bicha, and we have a Mavarchim. And in addition to that, it's Shabbos Salichos. The power is enormous. And the power is to do small things that really matter. Hashem should give you all a good kebench diyar, and all that you need, and even more than you can imagine. Thank you very much for joining, and wishing you all a good kebench diyar. Sei gesund.